Hello, listeners, and welcome to, at last, the Season 2 finale of God versus God. Andrew, welcome.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Thanks.
All of you out there who've been following along breathlessly with us this season, of course, we've been pitting together the gods of ancient Egypt to determine which among them is best suited to make the ultimate comeback, come out of retirement, and return to save our troubled world, which still somehow seems to be getting more troubled by the day. All the more necessary.
Yeah.
And so in this finale of Season 2, we're going to make that final determination. We're going to determine who is the victor of the ancient Egypt season so that that winner can join our new pantheon and make that ultimate comeback. We're very excited to be here to conclude this wild and woolly season. And I feel like full disclosures are necessary up front. So for those listening at home, Andrew, I have to tell them. So we've got our wires crossed a little bit on the dress code for the finale. So I repeated the tradition I thought that we had from season 1. I have my full tuxedo on for the formality of the occasion. I also timed it to get a fresh haircut this afternoon, which I now realize completely lost on the audience. Totally useless, but hopefully at least you can appreciate it. So I'm feeling good. Yes, thank you. Andrew, on the other hand, and you can't see it, but he's dressed in full Egyptian god wear, the same looks we've been describing all season. Right. So looking very good, head to toe in mummy form. He's got the Atef crown going. He's got a Waz scepter. He's carrying the Ankh. I'm thankful that you're showing this commitment. I'm also grateful you've not gone the extra mile and taken the head of a jackal or a crocodile or a cat. Feel like that could interfere with your powers of speech. And frankly, be very distracting to me. So I admire your restraint in remaining human-headed.
Thanks. Yeah,
for this recording.
The Atef crown is about as far as I could go.
That's right. Well, well done on your festive attire. My hat would be off to you if I'd bothered to wear one. So before we get into how this episode's going to work, I'd love to give a quick word on our winner from season 1. Kind of a status update from how that winner is doing. It's been, as we've discussed, nearly a year. It was last October. Right. I think it's time we can issue a spoiler for those who fall behind. Yeah. So the first season's prize was the Golden Goat, and the winner of that it turned out, the slimmest of margins.
Yes.
In a dramatic tiebreaker was, in fact, Prometheus, who edged out Apollo in that final competition. So the god of fire just managed to burn just a little brighter, and the god of prophecy just shrugged and said he saw it coming. But it was close. And so now it's time to ask ourselves, given a year of history, how has Prometheus been doing since he joined this new pantheon? So I think we can say without doubt, there's been no shortage of his primary tool of fire. Of course, the Canadian wildfires that we've seen, they've made for some hazy days, both on the East Coast where you are and here as well, in a very kind of orangey, mysterious way. It has, the heat has been on, the hottest summer, I think, in recorded history, which has been very bad for the South, very bad for Europe. Actually, quite pleasant here in Chicago. So, say Prometheus, whatever you're doing, keep up the good work.
You're spared.
Yes, so far. Prometheus has been a subtle presence in pop culture, of course, thanks to the hit movie Oppenheimer, which is based on the book American Prometheus.
Correct.
That film, of course, a reminder in more current day terms of what happens when you introduce immeasurable fiery power to humanity. You may recall, and I was recently reminded of this, Prometheus was also the god of unintended consequences. And of course, last year had plenty of those. For instance, usually, at least in our country, justice and electoral democracy, typically both good things working kind of independently.
Right.
However flawed, this year it's shaping up that each of them is going to sort of have a feedback loop with the other to make each one even more of a disaster. Right. So that's going to be a challenge. Unintended consequence. Nobody saw that coming. They're supposed to be parallel tracks.
Yeah.
They will likely intersect. Also unintended consequences. That guy in Russia who led that coup. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, he ended up, by a strange coincidence, dying in a plane crash just a couple of months later. Nobody saw that coming. So just goes to show you never know. Unintended consequences not in short supply. And clearly Prometheus has been busy. I'm not clear how these contributions are helping to save our troubled world, but at least he's making his presence known. Andrew, anything you'd like to add about Prometheus in the last
one? In his first round with us, Prometheus he gave primitive men fire, which kicked off all technology, craftsmanship, culinary improvement, ramen noodles and such. But in that less than a year since his unretirement, what's he done for us? Now, I talked to the Nobel Committee, and apparently we can't prove that this is all Prometheus, as they made very clear. But after what a period that the economist Tyler Cohen described as the Great Stagnation, technology has really kicked off. So just a couple of weeks ago, the New York Times ran a headline that said, "Pig kidney performing well in 2 brain-dead patients."
Okay.
So that is good. Yeah. We, of course, have our creepy friends in the large language model community, such as ChatGPT.
Right.
An innovation with no conceivable possible downsides.
No, it should be just smooth sailing from here on out.
Yeah. There's also, I don't know if you saw this one, but there was a vaccine introduced for bees.
No.
Yeah, so to help them fight a nasty fungus. So we of course had the god of beekeeping in. So I think maybe Prometheus threw one to his fellow god.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Also, last year NASA tested the double asteroid redirection test.
Okay.
Where they launched into space an object that smashed into the asteroid Dimorphos. Yes. Changing its orbit.
That's right.
First time mankind has reached into space and changed the path of a celestial object. Of course, Prometheus famously went to the moon. I'm sorry, went to the sun and got his fire.
Yes.
And then lastly, just yesterday, because I had to throw this one in, I read about the creation of a human embryo-like cell mass that was started from stem cells that mimicked a human embryo. So now again, I'm sure there's no possible downside for these scientists playing God in this way. So
definitely not.
So nothing but gravy from here on out. So I would say thank you, Prometheus, and to all our listeners. Well, you're welcome.
Exactly. That's wow. Well, that certainly is more compelling evidence than is smoky air in a movie. So that's maybe a little more encouraging. Very good. Yeah. Well, thank you, Prometheus. Keep up the good work. We look forward to, at the end of this episode, providing a colleague for you in that new pantheon to aid in your labors. Well, after that update, let's talk about the rules here. Let's talk about how this finale is going to work. It's going to be a slight update from last season, so please pay careful attention. If you're not seated, please have a comfortable seat. To give your full focus. So Andrew and I, once again, have painstakingly gone through the entirety of the season in audio. A little bit shorter this season, only 10 and a half hours of content. So the equivalent of watching like a Barbenheimer doubleheader twice. Very modest amount of content. Now, here's how this works. Only the winners of the 7 episodes are eligible for this final round. So great contestants, not all made it through and won the golden ale for their individual episodes. So Andrew and I have considered those eligible contestants against our trusty 5 categories. And you know them by now very well: Immortal Combat, Curriculum Deity, Good God, Iconography, Matinee Idol. So the contestants who are eligible, we've gone through those categories, and only eligible if they have themselves won in direct competition in that category. So you've got to win your episode. And then to be eligible in that category, you have to have won that category as well. So a subset is eligible for each of the categories. So as you can imagine, anything involving our dear friend Andrew involved a powerful spreadsheet. This was no exception. So we got those all whittled down. Each of us separately chose our top 2 eligible finishers in each category, awarded points accordingly. So the first half of this episode, immediately following this brief preamble, and I've actually written the word brief in quotes, we're going to walk through our choices. We're going to talk through who our number 2 and number 1 choices were of eligible contestants in each category. We're going to put the tally together. That will give us our 2 finalists, ending the first part of the episode. Then, after a short break of no more than 10 seconds, we will immediately resume the second half of the show, in which Andrew and I are going to pit those 2 finalists together, as we did last time, against 3 all-new finale-specific categories, which we'll talk about as we get to them. So ultimately, we're going to do all that math. We'll come up with our competitor who finishes as the ultimate victor. They will receive the golden ale for the season, and they will join Prometheus, god of fire, in our new pantheon of gods, making the ultimate comeback to save us all.
That's right.
Did I get that correct, Andrew? Because if I didn't, and we didn't follow the same rules, this episode is royally screwed.
Yes, no, we have the same rules. I think I had thought at the end we may have the ultimate winner get the golden bull, since this has been a very cow forward season.
Yeah, I've already painstakingly prepared the graphics for the finale.
Oh, that's right.
That might.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Suggestion noted. But very good. Well then, with all that clear, let's commence season 2, season finale. And as we say, but once a season, may the best 2 finalists emerge. So, Andrew, why don't you begin to call out the categories and have us reveal our top 2 and why?
All right. We start as always with Immortal Combat, which is again who would win in kind of a schoolyard fight 1-on-1. And I'm going to give my top 2 winners first, starting with number 2. So number 2, I went with Ra, King of the Gods. He is, talk about battle hardened. Every night he takes the Sunbark through the underworld, battling demons, battling snakes, battling snake-headed demons, and I wouldn't be shocked to learn that he had some demon-headed snakes in there as well.
In the mix, yeah.
And with an undefeated record, I would add. Now, so why did he get number 2 and not number 1? Well, of course, Ra's go-to move is really to delegate the fighting to someone else.
Right.
So, we think he probably does well. He certainly is a good commander, but doing battle himself 1-on-1 is not his forte. So for me, that moved him down to number 2.
Fair enough.
So, and then number 1, my first place vote went to Horus, the god of the sky. We know that he is at this point also very, very battle hardened. He spent 80 years in a close contest against his uncle Set. He cut off his own mother's head, so we know he has the fight in him.
Yes.
And he ultimately came out victorious in that pitched battle. He certainly has the determination. So I went with Horus as number 1.
Very nice. Good. Well, I feel like eligible in this category were just 3 gods. So you had the 2 that you named, Ra and Horus, and Khonsu is the 3rd. So we're dealing with a subset here. Now Ra was my runner-up in the 3rd slot. So he didn't get my top 2, but I feel like given he has the stature he does, I feel like I should give a little explanation as to why Ra did not crack the top 2. As you said, great power, creator of all things. You pointed out back in episode 1, I believe, that he had potentially the power, if he wanted to, as creator, to just name a weapon and it would appear if he wanted to. But as you indicated, hand-to-hand combat, some serious deficiencies there. The entourage was very much delegated to. The best he could kind of do as a kind of go-to move was removing an eye and sending it out into the universe to spy on people, which is great in surveillance, but not so much in combat. So, but a bigger concern with Ra is to save this troubled world requires a bit of time and energy, and Ra is a busy man. I just don't know if he has the time to fit us in. He's got, as you said, all those battles built into his daily routine. Apart from the snake battles, is cocktail parties with the dead, clothing drives. It's a very full schedule.
Yeah.
So he's bandwidth constrained. But also, it occurred to me we'll recall, a baby in the morning, and a kind of a drooling old man in the end of the day. So really, his window of good fighting is really only midday.
Yeah.
So there's some limitations there. So all due respect for Ra, but he didn't make the top 2 for me, and I figured I owed him that explanation. Coming in at number 2 for me was in fact Khonsu, the moon god. He was the victor of our most recent installment, episode 7. Had some interesting kind of novel motifs in terms of combat. He was able to control the moon and the evening light, and we decided also the tides, even if the Egyptians did not know that, but this is modern day, so it's relevant. So if the battle was by the sea, he'd be advantageous there. Had that sort of bloodthirsty, fierce nature. He had the falcon head, so if all else failed, he could peck at you. And he was, of course, a healer. So if he were to get injured in the fight, he could presumably heal himself. And as we covered, he can also control time. So if he makes a misstep in battle, he gets his trusty old Rolex out, dials it back, and gets a second shot. And if he ever, if all else fails, if he gets into trouble, he can always gamble his way out of it, which was typically his go-to move against Best. So hand-to-hand combat-wise, a lot of options for Khonsu. Pretty good choice. Give him the second slot. But for my first shot, I will give it to Horus, the Sky God, champion of episode 6. And you mentioned some of the good reasons why. Of course, willingness to fight. Yes, he began the battle against Uncle Set in the contendings of Horus and Set at such a young age. He was barely done breastfeeding, so had an itching to get the fight on as soon as he could. Of course, great resilience over 80 years. As you mentioned, he had the temper to behead his own mother temporarily. She was beheaded. Isis was eventually.
Yep.
And also versatility. You got to go where the battle goes. And sometimes the battle takes you to traditional combat. Sometimes it gets into things like shifting into a hippo and holding your breath and having that be a contest. And he was versatile in all those modes of battle. No reason to think he wouldn't succeed in hand-to-hand combat here. And he did ultimately win over time, over 80 years, and he got the job done. So whether he is, whatever form he takes, full falcon-headed man, full falcon, head of a falcon, body of a lion, head of a falcon, body of a crocodile, all options, all in his toolkit in battle. Yeah. So, and last but not least, as God of the Sky, he also possesses the power over it. He can manipulate storms. So that's a great advantage as well in the hand-to-hand combat. If things go south, create a tropical storm, mix it up.
Right.
So between that willingness to fight the temper, track record in battle, and significant tools in combat, I get top vote in this category goes to Horus.
All right, so we're in agreement there, and 2 number 1 votes for Horus. Strong start.
And remind me, Andrew, each first place vote gets 6 points. 2. All right, okay. And the second place vote gets 1.
Yeah.
In the grand tally. Very good.
Yep.
For those of you keeping score at home.
Yeah, if you didn't get your scorecard, those hopefully are in the mail, coming to you, commemorative. So
that's right.
So we're going to go to our second category, which is curriculum, deity. And Matt, as is tradition, why don't you take the lead on this one?
Yes. So only 2 gods eligible in this one, Thoth and Isis. So wanted to shout out a lot of great competitors, Hather, Tefnut, Bastet, Bess, all in the mix, who did well in this category, but did not win the golden ale for that episode. So they're not eligible here. Only 2 remaining contestants, but because points do matter, we still have to rank them. So coming in number 2 for me is Isis, Goddess of Healing, the champion of episode 4. And, as far as being versus worship, I think in terms of being, yes, she was a queen, which is a good thing, but had a very difficult run. We can agree to that. Had that great marriage at the beginning to Osiris, who was this kind, charismatic fellow and leader. Got to take over the reins while he was away on his little cultural backpacking tour of Europe. So had a brief stint as pharaoh herself. But then, of course, the troubles began. Her husband was assassinated multiple times, and this long period of danger, of wandering. Ultimately, Osiris did come back on top. I'm sorry, Isis came back on top along with Osiris. Was summarily then retired to the afterlife. But of course, in the end, Horus, their son, defeated Set. Family power was restored over the course of an 80-year ordeal. So, as you pointed out in that episode, as bonus points, Isis also managed to find a wealthy Greek guy and get me remarried after all this. So, a few thousand years before Jackie Onassis put that and made it fashionable. So, highs and lows along the way, but ultimately some pretty good highs, I think, over the course of Isis's career. In terms of worship, definitely, as you pointed out, a rags to riches story. I believe you mentioned she at the beginning was essentially just a deified chair.
Yes.
And it rose from being humble furniture to a goddess who was universally beloved. Lots of iconic moments. Had worship that ritualized, particularly Lamentations. It was a little heavy on the mourning, but due to her the first death of Osiris and her mourning there, had good practice with it. And a pretty strong festival, right? It was a very sort of a festive atmosphere, good costumes. There was a bit of a serious element with the Lamentations, but ultimately, as you like it, a big party on the beach afterward as everybody gave gifts to the temple of Isis. So pretty good showing there. That gets her the second slot. But for me, in the first slot for this one, I'm going to go with Thoth, God of Wisdom, from episode 3. So pros and cons, right? So in terms of being, you pointed out in that episode, he was a bit of a workaholic, had a lot of jobs, sort of the Ryan Seacrest of his day, advising the kings, a lot of writing. He had a part to play on the Solar Barge, was recording the Judgment of Souls, had a lot to do. Also had a bit of a commute, which is a bit of a downside. This is, spending time in the Duat as part of his responsibilities. They did not let you work from home back then, so he had to make that trek.
No.
But ultimately, some good spots. He did lots of writing. So you talked about the 42 book series that he was written by Thoth to talk about the whole philosophy of the Egyptians, closely guarded, very highly regarded to that. And as you also pointed out, he is credited by at least one historian of writing 36,525 books.
Yeah.
Which I think is close to where Stephen King is at this point. I did the math. We will not have that many podcast episodes until about this time next year. So we're getting close. So yeah, we're talking about some pretty good pros in terms of worshiping, a couple big temples. I think you pointed out, even though he didn't have as many temples as some of his competitors, a lot of the temples had a good Thoth section. So he was sort of this franchise model for convenience where, you get to the equivalent of a 7-Eleven, just built into the gas station.
Right.
Had a pretty good festival as well. So I think you mentioned it was somewhere right between the Death of Osiris Fest, so the real sort of lamentation heavy mourning one, and the Drunken Goddess Festival. Thoth's birthday was right there in between. So there's sort of like right in the middle in terms of tone. So not as somber as the sort of death-oriented one, not as raucous as the other one. Right. Between raucous and somber, the sweet spot right in the middle. Which is how I kind of use my Saturdays, really right in the middle, just the transition period. And you pointed out the ibis bird was sacred, and that was a big thing for Thoth. So if you wanted to be in his good graces, you could make a mummy of one of these birds and present it to the god. So, not only do you get a god to worship, you get a nice little sort of arts and crafts hobby to add to the side of it. You can dabble in bird mummification. So given all that, I think Thoth gets the edge for me. Isis had a lot of suffering in between the good times. Thoth had a fairly consistently productive career, pretty steady. And so to be and to worship, I give that to Thoth.
All right. Interesting. So, it's going to seem superficially like we're really close on this one. But actually, we're exact opposite, because I have my second, because since we had so limited options,
right?
My second vote goes to Thoth. He was that intellectual scribe, wise man, an occasional monkey, guy with an ibis head. I did downgrade him a little bit because I felt like if you're gonna be Thoth, you're gonna have an ibis head for a good amount of the time.
Yeah.
And while that did come with the ability to hear grubs underground, which I'm not discounting, that was a little bit of a downgrade for me.
Sure.
Maybe I'm being a little conservative. It's just a look that I a little bit of a risk there.
I agree.
So number one, that means that it came down to Isis, and despite having some rough patches in that life story, as you laid out, the death of Osiris, having the sort of stress of that long, prolonged battle with Horus and Set. She also had to run from Set while Horus was a baby, but she always kept her head. She was always able to do what needed to be done. Whether it was poisoning her great-grandfather with a magic snake made from drool and dirt, or reassembling her husband in order to conceive a revenge baby with a dead guy. She was willing to do what needed to be done, and I admire that. So she, that's the kind of aspirational, that can-do spirit that she seemed to always have.
I will point out that she always kept her head in a figurative sense.
Oh, that is true. But even without her head, she was calm and did not
That's true.
did not panic.
Nope.
So on the worship, she had that meteoric rise, and at one point was said to even rival Christianity in the late antiquity. But her cult had that celebratory spirit. Yes, there was the lamentations, but at the appropriate time at a funeral. So
sure.
Willing to let go there. But overall, I figured that would be pretty good. And I think on the the Thoth cult. The ibis mummification. You may recall that there was some scandal there. Sometimes you would get a mummified ibis that was really only half ibis.
That's true.
they were cutting the ibis.
Cut some corners.
Yeah, had to watch out for that. So for all those reasons, I decided to go with Isis is number 1, Thoth is number 2.
Okay.
And so we'll go from there.
Very good.
And that moves us to our third round, which is Good God. All right. So, and I will take the first one here. So on this one, on my second vote, I went with Isis again. So we should remember that in her relationship with humans, Isis is primarily known for protecting mothers and children. She's known for healing sick kids.
Right.
She, and of course, does set the gold standard for funeral lamentation.
Yeah.
Hardworking at that. She falls to second, however, because of her relationship with some of her fellow gods. Yes, she was very clever, but not so nice in poisoning Ra, the great grandfather.
Right.
Was willing to, throw a harpoon at another god, maybe cheat at some boating games. So, for those reasons, she didn't quite make it to the number 1 for me, and it was downgraded, despite her pretty stellar record with treating of humans. Even though one of the kids she is known for saving was poisoned by her pet scorpion. So
that's right.
But so for Good God. In the lead here, I had Osiris. So you will recall that the first day on the job, what does Osiris do? He ends cannibalism.
That's right. A progressive hero.
That is a pretty big win. He just, by executive order, comes in there, signs on the first day, no more eating each other. So
that's right.
Pretty good. Maybe some other gods would have done that, but there were god kings before that, and none of them did.
No.
It was Osiris who did it. So, and within that reign, in addition to the ending cannibalism, by all accounts, he was a good king. He spread civilization not only in Egypt, but in a goodwill tour around the Mediterranean, spreading that knowledge of civilization and learning and not eating each other. So big win.
All the hallmarks of lasting cultures.
Yes. So and even after being killed twice, you'll recall, instead of just going into full retirement, which he totally would have been justified,
right?
Having been killed twice and hacked to pieces, he continues to give back to the community and takes lordship over the dead. And by all accounts that we get through Egyptian writing, he was again a fair ruler, deciding fairly between who got to go to the good place and who got to be eaten by a serpent. So I gave him, for all those reasons, he came out number 1 for me.
Excellent. Well, he is in second place. I will give a shout out to Isis for getting a close third. For the reasons you described. Osiris gets second place for me here because I think he shows a lot of character in some of the travails that he goes through. So I don't have to mention the cannibalism thing, that, of course, coming out strong. I do want to pair it with the fact that he was also a champion of agriculture. So not only was he outlawing people from eating other people, but he was encouraging people to grow more arable crops. So raising the nutrition level of his constituency, both in terms of adjusting for the lack of nutrition in human meat, but on the other side, making sure there's plenty of good stuff to grow.
Yep.
A good long-term strategic move there that shows good character. And I gotta believe all those experiences he went through, being trapped in a coffin after, being sort of usurped, dismembered, distributed, reconstituted, those all got to be character building. I mean, you're going to learn lessons from that. That is not something, particularly from a privileged, scion of the royal family.
Yeah.
That's a lot to go through. And I think he showed some good marks there. And as you mentioned, running the afterlife, an active service in that third act, he didn't have to do, but he did. And as you said, did a good job. As long as you were on his good side, he did pretty well. on the whole, I think definitely could be considered a stand-up guy if, in fact, even if half the time he was unable to actually stand up.
Yeah.
But pretty solid character throughout. I went with Ra as my number one, and I think that it's this idea that his character has great longevity. It comes through in the lasting contributions he made. So not just the sort of things he did, stories we know, but creating the world, the concept of divine order, making sure that the world was not just a sort of messy place, but it had a certain set of logic to it. As I believe you pointed out in episode 1, he also gave up power voluntarily when it was time to allow new gods to come into the scene. So give him character points for that. And just did his job every day. Got it done.
Right.
Got the solar barge, a lot of effort that takes, living and dying, the aging, coming face to face with your own corpse every day, fighting the giant snakes. The consistency of that is to be admired. And just nice character touches, like holding a little clothing drive for underclothed deities as the course of his routine travels. Admittedly, the whole Eye of Ra thing, just sending his eye out to spy on people, a little creepy. But we'll let that slide a little bit. He ended up starting a bit of a rebellion, I believe, but he also ended up diffusing that situation, so it turned out okay. So, of those two, between the top two of Osiris and Ra in terms of character, I give Ra the nod because of the consistency of that character. He was always that guy from beginning, day in and day out. Whereas Osiris, for all of his strengths, let's just say he had his ups and downs. He had his moments of strength and his moments of weakness. So for that reason, giving character a bit of a premium here, I give Ra my number one vote.
All right. Excellent. All right. And that brings us to iconography. So that is, who has the lasting legacy,
right?
Who's with us today most? And I'm going to go, or you're going to go first on this one, right?
Yeah. So lots of eligible contestants here. As we've discussed, this was the Egyptian gods are a little more obscure in our own culture.
Right.
Not as easy to find some of these lasting marks as it was in our Greco-Roman season. So a little tough to call, a little extra research to be done. And with all due respect, Andrew, it seems like you had to work even a little harder to find holster manufacturers for a number of these deities. Normally, I would give Ra some credit here for the staff of Ra showing up in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and of course, the great musician Sun Ra, favorite of mine, but did not quite make the cut. My top two. Second is going to be Osiris. So, of course, the name does live on, as we talked about. There's a band, there's an optical spectrometer, but more importantly, Osiris has the aesthetic influence that remains powerful in how we think about Egyptians, even to this day. So, of course, the mummy look, he debuted that. You'll recall it was by necessity, but that has become the iconic look for ancient Egypt. As we talked about, it was Anubis doing the mummying, but Osiris being incapable of doing itself.
He wore the best.
That's right. So you get the mummy from his tradition. You also get the fake beard, the mummy beard, that little chin beard that is now so iconic as well, is essential to that ancient Egyptian look, and as I mentioned, also essential to the band Linkin Park for a while back in the early 2000s. And that extra solar planet called Osiris that is 200 times bigger than the Earth. So bonus points for that. It's a nice amount of lasting influence, at least in terms of how we look back at Egyptian culture and some of pop culture as well. But I think Isis has to get the number one vote for me. You mentioned there's a song by Bob Dylan, which always automatically scores points. The band from Boston, Denver bookstore, perfume, some fashion awards, a superhero show. Last week, just this past Sunday, the goddess Isis got a shout out on the show Billions on Showtime. Can't get much more current day than this one.
That's right.
And for better or for worse, thanks to the antics and the shenanigans of those Al Qaeda little brother folks over there, the name Isis does live on despite their eventual defeat. I think they're defeated, right?
Yeah, I think they're mostly defeated.
All right.
Yeah.
But they've certainly been in the headlines, we can say, over the last many years. So for better or for worse, Isis has become a household name. And so for that, Isis gets my number one.
All right. Interesting. So, I will say that I too had Ra as a close third. He almost made it in there for some of the reasons that you mentioned. The staff of Ra in the great movie Indiana Jones. But he also had a mention in the Christian Bible as as the deity. He was a little bit the bad guy, and I got a little bit of a bad portrayal in that particular episode. But that's a book that's, as you pointed out, still a number one seller, but very minor part. So I didn't give that too much credit, and that's why he ended up in number 3. So, and I had the same two first 1 and 2 as you did between Osiris and Isis. It came down to the perhaps that original power couple, Osiris and Isis. For starters, those two names were by far the most popular baby names in the U.S. among our potential Golden Ale winners. There, Osiris, he narrowly beat out Isis. Osiris had 126 babies per million
BPMs.
In his for named, and Isis had 62 babies per million. Okay. So he nearly doubled her up there.
Not bad.
Now it is true that Isis is recovering a little bit from that association with the incredibly violent horrible terrorist group.
Yes.
But it did put Osiris in the lead on that. And then, of course, I had to look at holsters.
Sure.
And unfortunately, the only holster for Isis that I could find were again associated with the radical group ISIS.
You got to see that coming. Yes.
Yeah.
They had to put those guns somewhere.
There were some that are out there on eBay and things for people who are into those sort of collections, but those are not manufactured and not directly associated with the goddess.
Not officially branded merchandise.
No, not. It's very off-brand.
Yes,
for her. So couldn't really count that. But for Osiris, on the other hand, there is the Osiris holster for Glocks.
No.
And this is, and the advertising says, copy says, the Osiris is our overt over-the-waistband belt holster suited for the IDPA and the USPSA and general range use when paired with an appropriate belt mount, sold separately. So in other words, it is an over-the-waist belt clip that can be used for shooting range competitions, which I believe is what those letters stand for. I didn't bother to look them up, but coming in first with the baby names, coming in first with the holster, it was pretty clear that it was Isis number 2 and Osiris as number 1 for me.
Very good. I was going to ask about those acronyms. Thankfully, neither of us bothered to look them up.
No.
It sounded like maybe one was like a pickleball corporation, the other was like the United States Postal Service output. In either case, having a firearm maybe not always the worst thing, but no.
Right.
We'll save those for the for the footnotes.
Yeah, in case that pickleball games go south.
Right.
And that brings us to our final regular category, where we will finish this out, and that is, of course, the ever popular and always pertinent matinee idol, where we decide whose life would make the better movie or limited series. And I'm going to go first on this one. So my second place vote went to the God of the Moon, Khonsu, which had the Tale of the Gambling Moon, had some modern updates in it. One of the reasons, though, that he did fall for number 2 is there might have been some copyright issues with that time watch. So if we actually ever get our pitch bought by one of the major studios, once they clear up their current labor disputes, the lawyers are going to have some work to do on that. So, but it is an interesting story. Khonsu already has a Marvel/Disney vehicle. So combine that with the pitch that you gave and the Marvel vehicle, I figured that's good for at least a number 2 vote.
Yes. And
then for number 1 in this group, I went with King of the Gods, God of the Sun, Ra as the winner. He had an epic action-packed nightly journey on that sunbark in the world of the dead that both begins and ends with the gods' daily rebirth at dawn as a baby. I gave Ra a nod in part because all of that action that is in there really comes from his tales and from the walls of some of the pharaohs' tombs. So that is a story that has been told for 5,000 years. Relies on his ancient mythology with limited embellishments on our parts, and of course, those tomb wall depictions are in the public commons at this point.
That's true.
So we can just feel free to grab those and use them as we will, and give our elevator pitch next time we're both out in Hollywood.
Yes. Excellent. Well, a few eligible for this one. I do recall Sobek and Bastet both had very good entries. Both had a draw in this category, so they were tied, and as non-category victors, were not eligible here. Also recall the episode of the Ptah episode being strong. Also just wanted to mention that just so I made sure Ptah got a shout out in this one.
Yeah.
But did not win the golden ale that week, so he could not qualify here. So I had Kansu as well for number 2, champion of episode 7. We were enthralled by the high stakes gambling nature of the series, the sort of Christopher Nolan-esque infinite loop. I thought you're wise to know there's a little bit more work involved with let's call it legal clearance with his time shifting Rolex. Now that is nothing that some lawyers couldn't figure out. Depending on our budget, I think we could come up with something. I mean, for instance, I was thinking, many great watch brands. If it didn't have to be Rolex, we could work our way down. True. In the same sense that I was at a party last weekend and wanted to have a refreshing Dr. Pepper, and it was not available. So I assumed there would at least be Mr. Pibb, which is sort of your second. Also tier, not available, but what was available was an ice cold can of Dr. Thunder, which is apparently a third stringer brand, but it was
not a malt beverage.
It was not. It was a delicious soda that hit the spot on a unseasonably warm Labor Day weekend.
Yep.
So there's always options if if it has to be a magic, Casio that he digital watch that he has to turn back, we can work it out. But definitely enjoyed the arc of that story. For my second place vote, for first place, and I do recall the cinematic appeal of Ra was excellent, so I do want to give that a shout out. I did go with Osiris for episode 2 for my top vote. You'll of course recall that cinematic treatment was as King Osiris's body parts are distributed throughout the world. Each segment or episode involves hunting one down to reconstitute the god slowly but surely. And of course, memorably, that took us in the end to Martha's Vineyard, where to find the fish who was originally the one who consumed the discarded phallus of Osiris. And in perhaps the cinematic surprise of the season, it became an unexpected prequel to the movie Jaws. So got some good feedback on that. Enjoyed talking through that. So that gripping cinematic tale got my vote. Although I have to point out that just as Rolex has yet to reach out to license the previous episode, I've not heard from Steven Spielberg either to option the story of Osiris as a prequel to Jaws. So despite that silence, I'm still giving those two my votes. So Kansu second, Osiris first.
Okay, excellent. All right, and so that involves a little bit of math, but I have been filling those in as we've gone along.
And I believe last time I think you first announced the sort of third place finisher, kind of like your Miss Congeniality award.
Yes, so we can do that here.
If you can crunch those numbers quickly.
Yes, and so so the third place we have Ra, God of the Sun, that busy guy, maybe a little too busy to come all the way back. So he came in third with 5 points, and then this time we didn't have a tie, which we did last time. So we have. In second place is Isis, Queen of the Gods, Throne Goddess, Mother of Gods, and she came in second with 7 points, and then in first place with 8 points is none other than her husband, King of the Dead, Osiris.
All right, so
we have
for our two finalists then. those who emerge from the first half to become eligible for that final. And these 3 new categories, the power couple, Isis and Osiris. So we will move them forward. They will start with a clean slate, and we will have our 3 new categories to choose between them to ultimately decide who wins season 2. So as preordained, Andrew, we're going to now take a quick break. You have 10 seconds to refresh yourself because we do not want to keep the audience waiting to get to those 3 new categories and take us on the road to part 2 of the finale. So back in just a Jeff.
All right.
And we're back for part 2 and the final part of season 2 finale, God versus God. Our 2 finalists have just been revealed, Isis and Osiris. We now move to the final round of competition between those 2. And of course, as we well know, and listeners well know, deeply intertwined, both husband and wife and brother and sister.
That's right.
So we did have one husband-wife pair in the previous season, Zeus and Hera.
Yep.
Right, from episode 12, I want to say, of season 1. Who ended up becoming ineligible for reasons that we don't have to go into, but not the case with Isis and Osiris. Right. So they are, so a lot of the same stories, but different angles on them. Highly regarded, both of them, broad skills, compelling stories, and yet, as the movie Highlander always reminds us, and let's hear it from Highlander.
There can be only one.
That's right.
Right. Yes.
The only one.
Yes.
So. Andrew, why don't you remind us of those 3 new categories only used for our final round in our finale that will help to determine our final winner?
Well, I feel like for most of our listeners, these probably going to be top of mind as they have been for the last 10 months.
Yes.
But just in case they haven't, or if they started on season 2, which is a perfectly legitimate thing to do.
Sure.
Our 3 categories for the finale are a little bit different than the 5 we've been using all season. The first one is God gifted. And that is simply, what are the benefits that we're going to get from the CD? We're going to go through all this trouble to bring them back. We're going through all this trouble of this mega episode for the finale. We want some benefits from that. And so that gives us God gifted. Yep. And then the second one, we have divine comity. Comity with the T. And that is... we're putting together a team. We're putting together an Ocean's 11 of a pantheon. They're going to have to be able to get along, be able to work well with others. It takes teamwork to make the dream work. So that's what we're looking for here.
Yes. And
then lastly, we have in God we trustworthiness. And that is, we do, God of unintended consequences or not, right. We do want to limit those downsides. So we're looking for the God that's not going to get us into too much trouble if and when we bring them back. So balancing those out, we think these are pretty strong categories to add to the 5 that you've been hearing all season. So once again, that first category is that I'm going to start off right now is God gifted. So to do this one, from my thinking, and I went back to the epithets that we use. So I looked some of those up off of the modern interwebs, and let's kind of go through those and what those sort of told me about each god. So for Osiris, the epithets that came up were, first one was Osiris, the inert one. So this is of course a reference to his status as a deity experiencing death. So and maybe isn't the best indicator for his upside potential. We already have some deities that are hanging around with a little bit of questionable work ethic as it is. Yeah. So that was a question, but there were some other ones, some of which were a little bit better. So his second one was Osiris, foremost among Westerners. Okay. So this is it sounds kind of cool.
It sounds like kind of a cowboy.
I feel like maybe the winners of the Western Conference in the NBA should take that title from now on every year.
That. Yeah.
But for Osiris's purpose, This was a reference to his rule of the land of the dead, which for the Egyptians was always in the west, and the land of the setting sun was where the that. So that is a thing that he brings to us. Certainly is ability to rule over the land of the dead. Should that be something that we need? We're all going to be there eventually, so we can't discount that.
That's right.
Osiris, the beautiful one, which is nice.
Sure,
nice to have a god who's nice to look at, easy on the eyes.
Yep.
So they have Osiris, he who is lastingly in a fine condition. So he takes care of himself, which I appreciate.
Well preserved. That's good. Yeah,
got some Brad Pitt vibes.
Yeah.
So really one of the big things that he brings, and it's hard for us really to know how to judge it, is the rule of the land of the dead, because we don't know really. Unfortunately, fortunately, we don't have direct access to what is the current state of the land of the dead.
I call that fortunate, but your mileage may vary.
For our ability to judge it,
yes,
it is a hindrance. So unfortunately, my concepts of the afterlife is pretty vague. Some sort of half remembered stories about fluffy clouds and a guy with a beard at a gate,
right?
Mixed in with the handbook for the recently deceased from Beetlejuice.
Yes.
So I'm sure there is some room for improvement based on that, at least if I'm anywhere in the neighborhood.
Sure.
In the Egyptian telling, there was an immediate no waiting. It was a quick pass or fail verdict that was acted upon. And applying this to our age, not again, comparative benefits of the Egyptian afterlife versus the ones available today is a little bit beyond even our ability to adjudicate. I do think having a non-eternal damnation is probably a plus for those of experiencing sinfulness.
I would agree. Yes.
So that's a plus. And he also, I do want to say, he has that connection you mentioned to vegetation and agriculture.
Yes.
Getting those crop yields up is probably pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So now for Isis on her epithets, we have these: Isis, the great of magic. So she has a heavy connection to magic. She can do some card tricks, a little entertainment, and some of her magic we're going to find out is tied to healing, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Then we get Isis, cleverer than a million gods. So that's pretty good. She's a million and one, and I'm gonna just say that I don't think anyone's ever said that of Osiris.
No, sir. Definitely not him or his security detail. No.
So then we have Isis, the star of the sea. And so I went on, what is this about? And it turns out that later in her career, Isis also became a sea goddess, among other things. She took and became responsible for guiding home ships. Now, you may think, do we really need that in this day and age with GPS and all that? But you will perhaps also recall that it was not that long ago that in the Suez Canal in Egypt, there was a boat that got stuck.
That's right.
So,
that was for like a couple of days, right? That was major disruption. Yeah,
major disruption of all world sea traffic. And so I think we shouldn't be too cocky that we do need some help there. So
great point.
And then we also get Isis, the Lady of the Green Crops. So Isis also did have an agricultural role, in part as the guarantor of the Nile floods. Mm-hmm. So she had some crop yield benefits as well.
Yeah.
And then Isis, Queen of Heaven, which having a little royal family is always nice. So both are these deities would bring that with them. So Isis, she offered healing. There are a number of stories where she uses that magic to heal other gods or people. Now, sometimes after she herself had poisoned them, or
details, it's all part of the context. Yeah.
But even if they were mostly dead and encased in a tree, she still, so that's some pretty powerful magic. Yeah. And Plutarch suggests that Isis also allowed herself to be like a mortal woman of sorrows in order to console those who are suffering of humanity. So she took a little bit of that on herself, to give some consolation. She's also said to be the one who ordained that men love women and that children love their parents. So she was spreading the love. Again, that magical healthcare. So, COVID is not what it once was, but we both know that it is still kicking around. And we don't know what else is around the corners. So having a deity with healing magic would hopefully be reassuring to us, and also, her protection of children and women is a good get. Same with the poor, though that one's a little bit more non-specific. So, that's what I had on them. So, what did you come up with?
So Isis ultimately gets your vote. Then was the
the
conclusion there? Okay, yeah. So I took it with a little bit of a different tact. I kind of each of the two finalists I put into sort of these things would be useful today. Yep. These things would be less useful today. So I love looking at it through this modern day lens. So Osiris, him being a champion, as you pointed out, of fertility, great for agriculture in this era of climate change, bioengineering, crop security issues.
Yep.
Some of the most vexing problems we frankly have to do with the global balance of agriculture. Now, not something we typically get into in detail on this program, but right. Ultimately an actual good ace in the hole that Osiris could between supply chain and world hunger could have a huge impact. So points for him there. We'll also recall he was, at least in our definition, an early feminist, in the sense that he left Osiris in charge when he went on his cultural journeys. So he did not hesitate to put a woman as pharaoh. So that sort of sense of feminine empowerment would certainly be a plus in today's work environments and getting people on the side. Similarly, we didn't mention this, but remember Osiris also had green skin, which would make an interesting, kind of an intriguing diversity hire for a corporation who wanted to kind of balance out the scales a little bit there. Right. And of course, his final act in terms of being useful was to head up the underworld and to manage the souls of the damned, which could equip him to be a pretty good corporate executive when you think about it. So he has those management skills. For those who are at the end of their rope, he will keep them in line. Those are all useful. Less useful, I think, in a modern day context for Osiris, while admirable, certainly, his aforementioned stance against cannibalism, radically progressive at the time. Today, I think we pretty much have that under control, with the possible exceptions of the occasional, plane crash in the Andes or the Showtime program Yellow Jackets. Beyond those two, cannibalism seems to be under control. Right. So useful at the time, less useful in a modern day context. Sure. The move that Osiris made to go to Europe and essentially just gather up and bring back all the best of art and culture back to Egypt as part of his trip, does that count as cultural appropriation? I'm not sure. It might be. I mean, if you do that from white people, I'm not sure it's as dangerous. But, I'd like to think he traded a little bit, but he certainly did his best. Yeah,
I think he gave as good as he got.
There was import and export involved. Fair enough.
Right.
So since Europe has done a great job of exporting its culture, that particular move would be less useful these days. And any role in being a leader or helping to save humanity, it has to involve public credibility. By today's standards, the fact that he was married to his sister, that could chip away his credibility. Of course, we will soon learn that will cancel itself out.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
So pretty good, strong ideas there. Couple of negatives. Isis, very useful in terms of having international and cross-cultural appeal, right? So we know a lot about how these gods did in their own home turf and sometimes some of the neighboring areas outside of Egypt. But you'll recall by the end of her run, Isis was essentially present in all these different traditions. She sort of had a presence in Juno and Venus, Hecate, the mother of the gods. So even after the ancient Egyptians had fallen out of favor, she really did live on across all these cultures, suggesting that could be really palatable among many nations of the world when she comes back if she wins this program. You went on about the healing and magic. Of course, we've gone on the benefit of those skills. Also useful, her ability to control an entourage of scorpion deities. Now, I don't know that comes up that often, but it certainly couldn't hurt. I mean, if there's any sort of situation where you've got a bunch of scorpions and you've got one person who can handle them, I'll take that person on my team any day. So we'll give her a point for that. I think most especially useful is her sense of patience. A lot of these stories about gods are about gods who are impatient, impetuous, need to get their way and get it quickly. Isis had great patience, years in hiding, looking for her missing husband, decades standing by her son Horus in his quest for the throne. So playing the long game is certainly part of her character. So points for being useful there for Isis. In terms of less useful, similar to the thing against Osiris, being married to her brother, I suppose that doesn't each other out in the head-to-head competition. Less useful was her ability to transform herself into a kite, which is a kind of bird. Again, nice parlor trick, kind of fun in a magic show, but maybe less useful in saving the world. Less useful, but still interesting, the ability to turn the saliva of Ra into a demonic clay snake and attack him with it, even bringing that mighty god to his knees. Now, if Ra's not in the picture, that maybe becomes a skill. Without him, without his saliva, there may be no contemporary case for that. So a little bit of mixed bag on both sides. I think I agree with you that Isis gets the nod here. I think the two of these figures experienced a lot in parallel. Obviously, their stories were very much in sync. We have, if we can use past data to predict the future, I think it's worth noting that Osiris was almost always in peril. Had a good run at the beginning, was always playing defense, always in trouble. Whereas Isis was typically the one taking charge, waiting for the right time, coming in to clean up his messes. So in terms of what is truly useful for this skill today, I think that set of skills wins the day. So Isis gets my vote for new category 1 as well.
All right. Yeah, no, I think that's right. Yeah, she definitely is the proactive one in that team, or what I was at the time. So, all right, we're in agreement there, and that moves us on to our second category, which is divine comedy. And why don't you take this one first, Matt?
Yeah. So in terms of playing well with others, Osiris, by all accounts, as a leader, just and fair, real man of the people, as his Middle Eastern neighbors to the north might have called him, a real mensch. Probably not to his face, but that they would have talked about it in that way. Hard to make a definitive judgment about playing well with others after the kingship, since again he was typically playing defense. He was trapped in a coffin. He was getting chopped up. He was posthumously creating children. But in his later years, definitely some good signs in terms of getting along with others. So remember, in the afterworld, you've got this is not a one-man show. The Egyptians would face the judgment of a tribunal of 42 divine judges. That's a big team to run. You likely had some strong-headed individual contributors in that team. So he kept all of those folks coordinated and doing their work. A lot of good management skills there. You also recall that those who did not make the cut were fed to Ammit, the soul-eating demon. But we really can't blame Osiris for that. He was just he was the guy with the clipboard, following the established protocols, got it all done. And no real stories of him being antagonistic. So seemed to get that afterlife third act together very smoothly, played by the rules. Very strong case in getting along with others, at least certainly at the macro level. Isis, in terms of getting along with others, the emblematic figure of motherhood and healing, hard to beat that. Even after, in certain situations, her sister Nephthys, of course, disguised herself, slept with her husband Osiris in disguise, and resulted in the love child Anubis. But Isis, to her credit, helped raise the love child anyway. Great example of playing with others. You've got this multidimensional sort of disguise-ridden, a very complicated family situation that she handled very well. Of course, she paired up with her sister in mourning, Osiris. That became emblematic. You mentioned one ding in terms of playing well with others, bringing that scorpion entourage around, having the scorpion unfortunately attack the small child nearly to death. Yep. It is true that Isis was able to use her healing powers to bring the youngster back, but certainly a ding in the category. And of course, very crafty in dealing with Ra, with the stealing of the old man drool, using it to form the clay snake, and using it to attack him to secure power for her son Horus. The plot ultimately did work, so we'll give her credit for that, but also pretty sneaky. She had her sneaky element. So it's a close one. There's elements to be made on both sides, arguments to be made. I think on one hand, Osiris, really has a blameless record with others, does well when he's not being chopped up and distributed or trapped in a coffin. Isis has a couple of dark moments with others. Then on the other hand, even in darker moments, Isis, to her credit, finds a way to resolve the situation through magic and diplomacy. So this classic question we keep coming to, the active role versus the passive role. And when it comes to getting along with others, it's not just not fighting with others, but also proactively getting that diplomacy cooking. So Osiris, very good at the big picture politics, help people in the abstract as the king. Yep. Isis excels that one-on-one level, really making it right individually. So it's a tough call because her role is more active and more creative and not so macro and bureaucratic. My vote by a very slim margin on this one does go to Isis.
Okay. All right. Interesting. All right. So for me, I think I'll start with Osiris again. I think he mostly does get good marks. Certainly as king, he was beloved. He of course got on well with his wife, which is always a win. Certainly. He gets along well with nearly all the gods, save his brother Set, which of course cost him dearly. And while it's not 100% clear how that falling out happened, we've emphasized the possibility of an affair with Set's wife, but one that the sister Nephthys tricks Osiris into.
That's right.
I don't want to give him too much blame because I think our best evidence is that he was tricked into this as well. So then he does go on eventually to the afterlife because of that falling out with Set, and there, as the king of the dead, he continues not only to run the kingdom of the dead, but he also works on a nightly basis with Ra. He provisions the bark. He perhaps loans out some of his guard demons. So he again is a team player. And then even after he's dead twice, he is respected enough to be brought back to judge that final decision between Horus, his posthumous son, and his murderous brother Set. Yes. And then he shocks the world by coming down on the side of his son in that.
After contemplating it for 80 years, yes.
Yeah, in that decision. So, the one deity that Osiris really doesn't do right by is actually deity who's perhaps his other son, Anubis. So Anubis is thought to be the product of that brief affair with his sister Nephthys, and he's basically abandoned by Nephthys and Osiris, really, only to actually be raised by Isis. So then, after Anubis is raised and he's out on his own, he's gone out and he's established himself down in the kingdom of the dead. Osiris comes in and says to him, son, I'm sorry that I abandoned you and I wasn't really around to raise you, but the good news is that we're going to be spending a lot more time together from now on.
It's true.
The bad news is that I'm taking your job and you're being demoted. So,
well, from a man who did both insult and injury, he was clearly able to dole out both to the next generation.
Yeah, so a little bit of an insensitivity there, though Anubis didn't seem to mind too much.
No.
Now, so Isis, on the other hand, tended to use her wits with her relationship with other gods, as you sort of pointed out to some extent already. She would use her wits to get what she wanted. She takes that snake to shake down Ra in order to empower her son Horus with the Eye of Horus. In the contendings of Horus and Set, she at one point transforms herself into a beautiful young woman to try and entrap Set into admitting that Horus has the better claim and set up sort of a Perry Mason moment for herself. Doesn't quite work, but she does get him to admit it, but it doesn't sway the jury. And she, I would say, is the brains behind that health code nightmare salad that was served to Set. So, she definitely knew how to get things done.
That's true.
She was used her guile to do it. On the other hand, she does display incredible loyalty to her husband Osiris and her son Horus. She takes on her husband's jackal-headed son. Seems to forgive her sister Nephthys.
Yeah.
And she has a good working relationship with Thoth, who helps her out from time to time, including putting her head back on.
Yeah, that's what really comes through for you. We need to get reheaded after you're beheaded.
Yes. Yeah. So she certainly had great loyalty, and that manipulation aspect could be effective, but it is also a bit of a high risk strategy, to be sure. So I think that really sets up a very close contest for me. And in this one, I think that maybe Isis is a little bit more high risk, and so I actually went with Osiris on this one. That he was got along better, certainly. So so we were split on that one. So Isis had the clear one in the first round.
Yes.
Split on 2. So we'll see what comes out in God We Trustworthiness. Osiris needs to win both our votes in order to tie it up. And so our next category we have In God We Trustworthiness. And this again is who has the least amount of downside.
Yes. Predictability, the non-loose cannon, if you will. Yes.
The one who's the most trustworthy. And so for me, Osiris in this one at first glance doesn't have much downside. As Pharaoh, he's pretty much a model ruler. He spreads culture around. He bans cannibalism. I will say his symbols include the thresher as an indication that he potentially, at least, is not above doing a little whoop ass.
Sure.
If the peasants get out of line.
That's right. That was the symbol. Yep, 100%.
So, but there aren't, to be fair, any noted incidents that I was able to find of him opening up said can.
No.
So he had that potential, but we can't say for sure that he ever really did it. As ruler of the land of the dead, again, he runs a tight ship. He's delegating a lot of work, but he's not engaged in a lot of shenanigans that we know of. So, but I think the area where I did find some potential downside risk with Osiris, it comes out of those 2 major negative events that we see with him, which involved getting tricked into sleeping with his sister-in-law, which really starts that whole epic myth cycle of family drama.
Yes.
And yes, Nephthys was disguised, but we don't really know how effective that disguise was. And while it's not in the narrative, there's part of me that suspects, it could have been not much more than a cheap wig and a false voice, and because there's something a little overly trusting about Osiris. Because we see that same type of error in the next one, which is his brother, who he's just wronged quite a bit, comes with a coffin to the party, and without question, Osiris just hops in and says, "Oh yeah. This
one fits." Yeah.
And if he doesn't do that, perhaps Set's whole plans are thwarted. We don't know, and it could have changed a lot of things. So
that's very true.
He's a little bit of a gullible god, and I think especially in this day and age of misinformation and social media craziness and conspiracy theorists, there's maybe a little bit of a heightened risk to having a god who's maybe a little bit too easily swayed.
Interesting.
So that's his downside risk. For Isis, it's a little bit in the other direction. She is clever. She's wily. But is she too clever for her own good or for ours? Not all of her tricks really land successfully. Also, on occasion, she will travel with a band of scorpion deities. Which I suppose that there's some risk there of scorpion proliferation or invasive species problems.
Big time.
which is a problem we're sensitive to. On occasion, she will resort to violence herself, and we know that her aim is not that great. So, I think especially if one's into snorkeling, you might have to be a little bit careful who you snorkel close to. If it is a chaos god or some sort of agent of Apophis, you could get a friendly fire shish kebab. So, you gotta be a little careful with that. But I will say we don't see her directing her wrath directly towards people in any large scale way.
That's right.
Even when she directs her wrath at Set in that harpoon, she actually does eventually relent and helps heal him. We've come to the raw snake poisoning a few times, but again, that was not wrathful. It was calculated and aimed at a fellow god.
Yes,
and I think for me at least, I kind of dinged her for that in the Divine Comedy section. So, and I think that's the correct place for me to put that. So, with all this said, for me, I went with Isis as the winner of In God's We Trustworthiness.
Interesting. Okay, so I read this category based on how we described it the first season as predictability, non-loose cannon.
Yeah.
So lots of ways to interpret trust, but to me, it is about consistency, predictability. And Osiris, I gotta say, is hard to beat when it comes to consistency. He is the ultimate kind of steady Eddie. I mean, he's associated with the cycles of nature, the sprouting of vegetation, the flooding of the Nile every year, even the rising of Orion and Sirius to mark each new year. All these emblems of consistency are all part of his makeup. He even had predictability baked into one of his epithets. He was permanently benign and youthful. So when everything else changes, this guy, steady Eddie. So as a king, and when he was in control, model of consistency, when he was a dying man trapped in a coffin at sea, incredibly consistent, did exactly what you'd expect him to. Yeah. When he was cut into 14 pieces and distributed throughout Egypt, unpredictable circumstances, but you can't blame his character for that. He did the best he could. And then, of course, as Lord of the Underworld, he kept that robust bureaucracy running very smoothly, where nobody had to wait in line. Everybody had a fair shake. So in terms of pure predictability, consistency, very, very strong marks for Osiris. Now, Isis, on the other hand, this is where her sense of cunning gets her into a little bit of trouble. So, we talked about, you alluded to this just a moment ago, her move to disguise herself as a mortal woman to trick Set into something of a confession, which she successfully did. But as you also pointed out in that episode, they quickly just moved on to hippo contests, and it was, despite that powerful legal moment, was not effective. Also, of course, assumed in the ordeal with the scorpions that almost got the kid killed. She also assumed a disguise in that one, so she was coming to the door, kind of dressed up as somebody else. So there's a bit of trickery that does to me translate as inconsistency. Of course, the ordeal with Ra and the spit snake, very sneaky, very backhanded there. All of these, to her credit, resulted in a decent outcome. Maybe not exactly the outcome she wanted, but at least in that direction. Her motivations were probably sound. I mean, no one's going to look at her dressing up and sneaking Horus into a confession or sneaking Set into a confession as a bad thing, because he was a monster. So good heart, fairly good outcomes, but predictable she was not.
Right. And
so through the lens of predictability, through not being a loose cannon, I give that decision to Osiris.
All right. So I think it can really only add to our credibility that we interpreted this final category completely differently. But that we did. However, be that as it may, I dinged Isis for some of the same things in the second round that you dinged her for in the third round.
That's true.
I think we came close to each other anyway, and we end up with Isis winning one round, 2 ties, and therefore Isis is our Golden Ale winner.
My goodness.
She will join Prometheus. So
Isis breaks the divine glass ceiling in the new pantheon and makes it so that there is now equal gender representation in the new pantheon alongside Prometheus. Will be interesting to see how the two of them get along.
Yes.
Clearly very different traditions, very different skill sets, mentalities. I might argue they could get along pretty well, because Prometheus had a bit of a cunning streak.
Yeah.
Well, he was inclined to maybe go against the grain from time to time with a good heart, because of his love for humanity. I think this may be a more of a kindred spirit between these two than others might have predicted.
Yeah, he certainly was not above a little trick. With
right.
whether it was with the sacrificial meat or something else.
That's right. Yeah.
So
we might have a pretty good match here. Well, I don't know. Technically, if Isis has been in retirement all these decades, and I assume she's moved on past her second husband, so maybe matching up with Prometheus is not only a great professional colleague relationship on the Pantheon, could be a love connection as well.
Yeah, well, you're gonna ship them.
Exactly. I will be their ship and their stand of both, if I'm using those terms correctly, and I doubt I am. Well, very good, an exciting and a nail biter as well. We didn't have to bring out the tie-breaking spreadsheet.
No, it was ready to go. It was ready.
I have no doubt that it was. Well, that is. So just last year, as I needed to then transport the golden goat to Prometheus in Greece, I assume one of us after we're done recording, we'll have to decide who goes to Egypt to deliver a ice cold golden ale to Isis in celebration of her victory. Well, Andrew, thank you for joining me once again on this journey, for making this all possible. Thank you to our listeners who have been through thick, thin, bizarre, strange, all of it.
Right.
To get to this endpoint. We've had a great time doing it. We have, as always, we do want to thank, of course, Andy Snow, whose theme music is indispensable. We do send you, of course, to our Spotify playlist. We will return in the coming weeks, and I think I can announce this with a Halloween special. So we had such a great response to our holiday special last year around the Christmas time, Santa versus Saturn. We are going to have a similar sort of a exhibition match, if you like, between seasons around Halloween. So we'll give you more details about that in the weeks ahead, and we'll time that just in time to celebrate Halloween. So something to look forward to, a bittersweet occasion. Sad though we are to conclude this season, we are also happy to look forward to that, and more announcements shortly thereafter about the future and what future seasons may hold. So keep your ears open for that. Anything you'd like to add, Andrew, before we sign off for season 2?
As always, like, rate, and review. Give us a follow on the socials. And all right. Other than that,
that'll do it. All right, folks. Well, thank you for traversing ancient Egypt with us. It has been our pleasure and our service, and we look forward to talking to you again later in the fall. Until then, take care. Talk to you soon.
Bye.